The internet's been kind of crazy, hasn't it, been, fellas?
I think rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
This is probably the biggest news that's happened in years.
In years?
In years. I think this is one of the biggest policy changes, just generally in when it comes to the economy, probably since COVID. I mean, that's not a policy change, but the biggest meteoric change, we'll say.
Oh, look, it's the audience. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Youth Bombs. I am Coleman.
I'm Craig.
I'm Holden.
I'm Carson.
And today we're talking about your favorite tariffs. And why are we talking about them again? Because April 2nd, a new reciprocal tariff plan was put out by the Trump administration. Now, I think reciprocal, it's a whole... There's a lot of nuance that needs to be discussed here. But, I mean, what doesn't require nuance is the chaos that has ensued thereafter. So we'll get into it. We sort of organized it where we have two people on this side. We're going to try to explain it, and then two people are trying to rip it to shreds, and then we'll go from there. So who wants to give this executive summary here? Craig, how about you?
Yeah, so essentially President Trump was looking at trade practices between our trade partners with countries like South Korea, Japan, UK, European Union, etc., the whole world, and seeing whether or not he feels those trade relationships are fair, as well as things like what the tariff rates they place on us are, or are they practicing currency manipulation, things like that, factored into a formula the White House administration developed in order to determine what the new tariff rates should be. So, essentially, many of these new tariffs from the White House are half the rate of what other countries place on us. Now, our friends are going to perhaps say that there's negatives, and I agree, it can harm economic growth. But I think that there's more to it than that. I think we have to look at the bigger picture of where we can influence policy long-term and how that will affect our economy and their economies. But what do you guys think? What's your take?
I'm going to say something to push back on what you just said really quick, which is that these are not based on any tariff rate. There are some countries on here which are being charged a tariff by the United States, which are not actually, they don't actually have tariffs placed on U.S. goods. There are several more which say they have listed 90% tariffs that charge tariff rates of less than 10%. For instance, the country of Lesotho is a very small, poor African country, which we primarily export or import goods from them, which are vanilla and spices. Because Lesotho is very poor, they don't buy a lot of U.S. goods because the U.S.'s exports are primarily very high value goods, so they have no use for them. So because of that, we ended up putting a 46% tariff that we said that they charge us a 90% tariff on Lesotho's goods, even though that's just based on the trade deficit that we have with them. So every single tariff rate is based on the trade deficit we have with that country, halved and put as a tariff rate.
Yeah, that Carson is actually correct here. And I can get into what they have here on this little sheet of paper here in a moment, but hold in your turn.
So it's just in goods. So what you said is not correct. It's not the tariff rate. It was arbitrary. So and it's just in goods, not in services. So it's imports. What percentage more does that country export more than they import from the United States? So that's a percentage. I export X percent more than I import from the United States. And then Trump just said divided by 2. So that was it. It wasn't any reacting to any tariff rate, right? It's not like this country has a 10% tariff rate, so we're going to do a 5% tariff rate. That's not how they calculated that. So
so let's get into the theory though, because the U.S. Office, United States Trade Representative, this is the closest thing we have to a white paper. It would be very interesting, at least as an econ student, to have all the detailed data, but for now this is all we have. So the goal, I guess, of the reciprocal tariff, again, as we discussed, tariff is a bit of a misnomer here, but to conceptualize reciprocal tariffs, the tariff rate that would drive bilateral trade deficits to zero were computed. So their goal here, broadly speaking, is to bring bilateral trade deficits to zero. So what they're doing here to calculate what tariff will we need to impose then to bring bilateral trade deficits to zero? And then you're right, the formula here is the change in delta tau subscript I, or the change in the tariff rate, would be exports minus imports divided by, well, basically imports. You have, other variables like elasticity, and then another variable here like respect to pass-through, but, that gets factored out. You get the point. The math, without getting too complicated here, to summarize, it's exports minus imports divided by imports. There.
Yeah, and if we did use the actual tariff rate that those countries impose on us, it would be much smaller numbers that we impose back on them. It would be so much less, even if we just used the rate, not dividing it by 2 or anything. So
yeah, I mean, well, many of those countries have lower tariff rates on average than the United States does. So I mean, it's not, and Trump, once again, he took out services, and the United States is a net exporter of services, right? We make a lot of services, so it's just insane. Like, of course, we're going to have a huge trade deficit in goods with all these countries. We don't make, relative to services, we make few goods as the size of our economy.
And something to note where I would disagree with the White House is on the nature of trade deficits themselves. It's not inherently a bad thing to have a trade deficit. For instance, if I shop a lot at Walmart, looking at a much smaller scale, and I don't sell anything to Walmart, that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, if we can get better deals with these other countries, as 50 have approached the United States and said they want to renegotiate, countries like Vietnam are looking at reducing the rate to 0 on American goods, then that's a positive for the long term. And we've had administrations going back decades that have said that they're trying to promote free trade, that that's their goal, and yet these other countries have had long-lasting tariffs on the United States. So we're not the ones who imposed them in the first place. They've already had tariffs on us, and if we can get lower rates, then great.
So we should get into that too. I have a few examples here. So let's say the United States imposes a 2.5% tariff on passenger vehicle imports, while the European Union has a 10% tariff and India has a 70% tariff. United States has imposed a 0% tariff for networking switches and routers, but India that tariff ranges from 10 to 20%. And then I can go on, but there's several instances here that the White House sources in which on individual goods there are unfair, deals basically.
So does that mean that we all agree that free trade is good, right? Our goal is to get to free trade. Is that what we all agree on?
Generally speaking, yes, except on critical goods. Like, I don't want China making critical infrastructure chips because that's a danger for national security. But pretty much otherwise, yes.
Okay,
so that's also part of the conversation, as Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bensent has said. Yeah.
So then the question then becomes, is this reaction disproportionate to what these other countries are imposing on U.S. goods? And you can name some outliers, but by and large, I think the metaphor here is that someone else is arguing with you about something and you think they're in the wrong, so you walk into their room running around shaking a hammer at them to show that you disagree with their argument. It's an incredibly disproportionate reaction to trade policy with, I believe, 90% of these countries. And so it may lead to some smaller countries saying, yes, we are going to negate our tariffs on your goods in exchange for you dropping these tariffs. Which, frankly, I don't know if Trump is going to go along with that, because it seems like Trump believes that tariffs are just good no matter what, and they aren't just a bargaining chip. But if he does, okay, there could have been some merit to that. I think the major issue is you have other countries, mainly bigger countries, like Japan and South Korea, who are now going to China to coordinate a response to the United States and its absolutely insane trade policy. Imagine that. Imagine tariffs, which have been routinely described as a tool to, help our national security interests, are driving our allies to China. I think that's crazy.
And the empirical observations show that whenever a country raises tariffs, they're more likely to have other countries retaliate. So, for example, during the Great Depression, when the Smoot-Hawley tariff was passed, other countries, over 25 other countries retaliated against the United States. So this is exactly what's happening right now. China has just announced a 34% tariff on American goods, on American imports. So, and also the European Union is wanting to increase their tariff rate. So there's going to be a lot of, they know that they can't really count on the United States, especially with this nonsense where one person can just raise tariffs unilaterally.
The major, just important thing I just want to say is that yes, this will work for smaller countries, but for these big countries with economies that might not be at the United States' level, but close to it, they're not going to have a problem with just saying, no, we don't want to, we're going to fight. And so I think that is kind of the major issue, is that you have those 50 primarily smaller countries that are backing down. But what about China? What about the European Union? What about Canada?
Yeah, and let's cut all of our tariffs to 0. Like that's the best policy for free trade, to encourage free trade abroad. Would be to have no tariffs.
Right. So I think again, this is similar to the conversation on energy policy, and as I've talked with you a lot, Holden, it was like we as Americans can convince ourselves, for instance, to like impose zero tariffs on other nations, or to extend the analogy, produce clean energy here. But then when you're dealing with international trade, how in the world can you convince other nations to do the same, in which they drop their tariffs in turn, right? Or they in turn use green energy? Like, you can't. Like, so part of what this is, even if we do argue, okay, it's like it's drastic, it's starting the conversation of, hey, now that we are going to now they're imposing at the minimum 10% tariffs. Let's see, I don't know, as we've already seen, say, with like Israel and Canada, like reach a better deal before like the deadlines reach. Because I think like the first deadline for the minimum 10% is April 6th, and then you have, or today, and then you have one with April 9th, which was like the additional ones on top of it. But anyway, that's just sort of the conversation we need to keep in mind here. Like, we can have idealist thinking domestically, but does that apply abroad? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, when you're dealing with tough state actors, it's important to keep in mind how they have behaved, how they are behaving, and how they will behave. And sometimes you do have to be tough, especially with countries like China, who are not a friend. And the ideal is that the jobs stay home. But if the jobs do go, then it would be the worst case scenario if they go to a country that's essentially an enemy like China that opposes us at every turn, that we only benefit from in terms of trade. And even then, they are working very hard with currency manipulation, breaking trade rules, dumping, etc., in order to harm American companies and assert themselves as the dominant power.
Well, I mean, currency manipulation is going on in the United States, too. All these countries have central banks. So you got the euro, which encompasses the European Union, obviously, and then the United States with the dollar, the Fed, and then China, the People's Bank of China. They're all manipulating their currencies. They're all manipulating interest rates. So China, to just single out China for currency manipulation, I always find amusing. It's a phenomenon that's going on all across the world. But I mean, and when China depreciates their currency and makes exports cheaper, that's good. We get stuff. Like, that's awesome. So why? That's great. They also subsidize people, or they subsidize companies for cars, like electric vehicles. I guess the United States doesn't want cheap electric vehicles, so we put a tariff on them. You know, it's just all it's insanity. The state needs to not be involved in production and trade. And then the other thing was trade. We benefit enormously with China, and those jobs are not fixed, right? Like, now, look, Americans don't have to make shirts anymore. They don't have to make T-shirts anymore. They could write code and actually use their mind and make more money with huge machines. That's amazing. We should be celebrating that. We don't want Americans doing that crap. We let Chinese workers who are less productive, less educated, do those jobs.
And I want to say, I think it's interesting because so many of the response to, or, you know, so many of the right-wing content creators that I see online, their response to the tariffs is, well, you're playing checkers, Trump is playing chess. He's trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States, which I think that's a different perspective than what you guys have. But I do want to say, just to anyone who believes that, when we implemented our steel tariffs in the first Trump term, we gained 3,000 jobs. I think at the high end is what the estimates are in steel, and we lost 75,000. So the idea that we even want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, which not that tariffs would do that, but the idea that we even want to, I mean, what Holden just said, we have a more sophisticated workforce now. We want that. We want our workforce to be using their labor for more productive means than factory work, in my opinion. And it's not, I don't think that's condescending to say or elitist to say. I think it's just, as Americans, if we have the capability to be more productive with our labor by doing less hard labor, by the way, then I feel like we should do that. I think that's kind of common sense.
Only buying American is anti-American. Forcing Americans to only buy American is anti-American because it's going to make them less productive and the standard of living will collapse.
Well, here's something else we should also keep in mind, like, insofar as how classes play into this conversation, like economic classes. You have a point in which, like, let's say, for instance, the upper class in which that do have, like, say, these coding jobs or government jobs or software engineering jobs at, like, Google, Microsoft, whatever, like, they're doing enormously well. And then I think in 2024, like, you had a very funny duality happen where at one end of the stick, in America, you have the record high of like European vacations with this upper class of people, which is like, okay, great. But then they're doing well off. But then you also have record high in like food bank, visitations or requests. I'm like, wait, what? How can that exist? Well, it's a matter of like you're forgetting about like the middle and lower classes that still have these manufacturing jobs in the meantime and trades like which they do have to like they're working, they're not unemployed. They have to like get as much groceries as they can from the store, but then they have to top it off from the food bank.
I mean, even leisure time, even real wages. I mean, all these things have gone up for the lower class too, right? Capitalism doesn't, it increases inequality, but that's also just because it increases the living standard for everyone. So I think it's, it's kind of silly. No, like there is a huge drop off in the amount of people who work in manufacturing, and it's not just among the upper class; it's also among the working class. I mean, compared to 70, 80 years ago, compare the percent of the working class that works in manufacturing then to now, it's a huge drop off. And guess what? The quality of work in the people who work in manufacturing in the lower class compared to then and now has also gone way up. Leisure time has gone up, productivity has gone up.
Yeah, and they're making more money, as Carson said, and the middle class is shrinking. This is true, but that's because more people are getting into the upper class. More people are considered upper class now than ever in American history. Over the last 40 years, like Bernie Sanders tells this, this to everybody that the poor, the wealth inequality is as high as it's ever been. I'm trying to do it. Coleman does it really well. Has been as high as has been as high as it's ever been. Yeah, and then and your wages have not raised a nickel. And then it's just like, yeah, it's true that it hasn't raised a nickel. It's raised a lot higher for you if you are in the bottom 10%. Virtually everything you buy is better quality for the same price. In terms of like how many hours do you have to work to buy it? Now the price tag will be different, of course, but how many hours do you have to put into your like what's the productivity of labor? Like even someone working in steel today, they make 20 times more steel or something around 20 times more steel than they did back in 1980. Yeah, and crude steel, like per hour worked. Insanity.
Real wages have also gone up. That is a myth that they haven't. But as they have gone up, it's also true that leisure time has gone up even at a higher rate than real wages. So I think it's it's funny because everybody's talking about the 4-day work week, especially on the left. We need to have a 4-day work week and all this stuff. Well, you're actually getting closer to a 4-day work week than you ever are under our current system.
Yeah. And by the way, not everything we want is happening, right? Like we would love unilateral free trade in production, just no restrictions on production and trade. And we would be getting much richer, much faster. It would be amazing. But that still doesn't take away from, even in the mixed economy today, with restrictions, tariffs, huge regulations on companies, we're still seeing an increase in the standard of living. That's just what we're seeing. And a lot of that has to do with globalization.
Capitalism is certainly making everyone wealthier. I agree with that. At the same time, we also know that not everyone who's 50 years old can just instantly reskill to close and get into coding, for instance. That's not something that you can just do overnight. So while tariffs aren't the solution to bring back the manufacturing jobs, we do want them, and we do need to keep in mind that not everyone is going to work in the services industry.
Okay, and I think just to quickly close, I'll provide, 15 seconds. But while I think the media tour has been, could have been a lot better insofar as communicating this policy, I do think we have a proof of concept within the past Trump administration. Like, I think, according to this brief, we have, the tariffs strengthened the U.S. economy, led to significant onshoring. We have, a 2023 report by the U.S. International Trade Commission that analyzed the effect on tariffs, yada, 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 but... Actually, I'm not going to read all this. Too long. But the point is, I think we saw success in the last administration. I don't see any reason to panic besides what's happening in the stock market. I think that'll be temporary. Sure, we lost $1 trillion in the stock market, but we've also secured $5 trillion in investment. So I think we just have to wait and see. Trig, what about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's my thought. We are bringing investment back into the United States. We have to be patient. Things are going to take time. You're not going to have an immediate fix to everything, but I trust the process, and I think that ultimately we're going to have better trade deals with other countries.
Well, you just got the biggest tax hike in maybe 4 decades, maybe more. So that's what Trump just did. Now, will 2/3 override his veto? Will the courts hold up? I don't know. Hopefully, but probably not, unfortunately. So that's what you've got. This is the administration.
Yeah, and I want to say the last thing is I think it's really ironic that you say that the tariffs worked in the first term. I just think that that's like every goal that they had clearly was proven not to work. But yeah.
Well, that being said, thanks everyone so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We upload 3 times a week. Feel free to reach out to us at youthbombs@alatrorepublicans.com. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks so much.